Okay, so welcome for this visit to Atlas Point 1 and the Atlas experiment. Now, just on the way, I tell you a few words about what we find around, because this is the main building, so we have everything for people who are just staying a few weeks for up to a few months. And for instance, on this side here, you see one of the main auditorium, which has been renewed recently. And this one, for instance, there is a meeting right now, so we should go away. And this is really an important room because this was one of the first rooms in which some really important physicists presented some results like Einstein and so on. And so if in case we find a new discovery, this would be this where we should show it. Then here we have what we call the room of the pas perdu, the lost steps, because people who were theoreticians can walk along these corridors just to think about things and so on. And on the left side, we have the library, which is huge and really interesting. Then we can follow the blue line just to lead us to the Atlas visit. And in these corridors, for instance, what is really nice to see are the different posters and offices, because we are in the what we call the TH division. So all these offices, are dedicated to one person and one important physicist. And really, we have a lot of course, expertise. You see, for instance, this one is Richard Feynman, so it's really a famous physicist. And often at CERN, we have some seminars about general topics given by a specialist in the field. And they just come for 1 hour or 1 hour and a half, and then you have really a nice overview, a summary. You can even ask the latest developments and so on. And not only in particle physics, but also to some other fields which are just around. So this is one of the things that we could really enjoy at CERN. So we continue to walk along some corridors in which we have also some other offices. And so it's a TH division theory. So these theoreticians interact with experimentalists. They give us advices. They tell us what we could do in terms of models and simulations before we test some physics models with our experiments. And for instance, Atlas is one of them. So what is also funny, for instance, in those offices is that sometimes, we see some huge piles of documents and so on, and some tafel, with a lot of things written there, and usually really quiet. And you can obviously find some people anytime during the night, during the week. So also out here, just a very short time, but we can see some old experiments going on, like on the left side, a huge generator of power, a kind of power supply that we could hold in a box now. And on the right side, you can see another experiment, which could be a detector or some experiments. So there is one called Gargamel, another one. These things are both showing accelerators, power supply, and detectors. So these are examples of really old times. So now I think let's go through the reception. Here we have some offices about the visit service. So now we are going to the Atlas experiment with our group. And what you see on the other side of the street is called the Globe of the Innovation. So this globe has been offered by Swiss several years ago, and it reminds us that, for instance, this is an international collaboration, and that some countries that have contributed to the different projects have given a kind of gift to CERN, just as a proof of the collaboration. And so it's made of wood, and of course with something to preserve it from time afterwards. And what we could already start to see in front of the globe, this blue part is, for instance, a part of the accelerator. And I know that this morning the group has seen the SM18 area, which is an area dedicated to the test and the maintenance of these dipoles. We have about 1,232 of these along the LHC, along the accelerator. And so this is a real one, but actually this one obviously can't be used. and is probably empty. But you can imagine how it goes into the tunnel and so on to build the full accelerator, the last one. So we continue on the way to Atlas. And I could probably remind you that, for instance, Atlas is an experiment in which we have about 2,500 people. So that's why the organization and all the different units there are a lot of these, of course, to make the experiment work. And there is also an exhibition in this globe. So we will just pass by on the left side another room in which you could see every hour or so a nice movie showing you some things about physics, astroparticles, and things like that in general, and that's what we show to some general visitors. Okay, so now we start to see a painting which is showing an example of collisions inside our detector, and the detector is aligned along this direction, and so you see from the start some tracks with different colors and also different layers of the detector. So this is a really nice painting here showing you an example of collisions of particles. The scale is half of the real size, so you can expect the detector twice big as that. And you see the different tracks from the center. So the different colors represent different particles. And the way we detect and we understand these events, we use different materials, different subdetectors, different technologies and systems. Let's start from the most important one, I would say. One of the most important one, the magnetic field. You have these pink parts at the borders. We are creating a magnetic force of a few Tesla. And this is bending the tracks of the detector, of the particles inside the yellow circle. This is, inside this circle, we have what we call the inner detector or tracking detector. And as you can see, for instance, we can already distinguish some charged particles from some neutral ones. Like you see from the center, you have some orange ones. One goes to the left side, another on the right side, and some go straight, okay, upstairs, for instance. The pink one going up and escaping from your detector. So you can already distinguish this. And then with the curvature, you can also calculate or estimate, measure what we call the momentum. This is the mass times the velocity. This doesn't tell us all, but we are on the way to identify particles. Then, if you continue, you have two layers of detectors, which are called calorimeters. You see this strong blue and this light blue. In this, you have different materials and electronic boards, and you can measure the energy of the particles. At a later stage, you combine the two systems, inner detector, or also called tracking detector, and the calorimeter, and you can identify the particles. Say this is an electron or a photon. And afterwards, beyond the orange and white circle, you have what we call the muon spectrometer, which is dedicated to one type of particle called the muons. And these ones are going so far because they are something like 208 times heavier than the electrons, but they are the same. So once they go through the first layers, they still have enough energy at the end to reach the outer layers. And the idea at the end, okay, I know it's very fast, I'm sorry about that, but you combine all the detectors together and you have chosen the materials and the size of your detectors just to be able to measure all particles from the collision point. And what that's it.
Neutrinos being faster than light?
No, but this is a different story. But okay, just in short, that some of these particles are neutrinos, and the way we measure them is like we find a missing energy somewhere. So we know the energy we have put, and if you measure the energy that you get out of the collision point, if you have a difference and you miss some particles, some of them we know they exist. They are called neutrinos, and they have no mass. And one nice experiment has showed recently that maybe we have found that their speed could be faster than the speed of light, something of the order of 1.2. And this is really under discussion in the scientific world because this is really something very huge. Like a guy would come and say, okay, today in the desert at 2 p.m. I can fly, you know. It's of the order of this, I think. So finally, if you combine all of this, you can calculate and measure all the number of tracks and their properties like energy, momentum, and some other things a bit more directed towards quantum mechanics, like the spin, hypercharge, and other quantum numbers, as we call them. And finally, what you want to see is a particular event like the Higgs. The Higgs into maybe 2 photons, like you would look inside one of the calorimeters to see 2 deposits of energy. Or the Higgs into 4 muons, which would mean you could see 4 tracks out of a huge number of tracks. And when I say huge here, you can see just 20, but in reality now we have maybe millions or so. Since we can have a very, very fast look, you can see on the right, on this side, some white containers. They contain, for instance, mixtures that we provide to the accelerators or to the detector, like liquid argon, liquid nitrogen, CO2. And on the other side, you have a huge amount of liquid helium that we need to provide to the cooling for the dipoles. And I think that you know what is supraconductivity now. Okay, so these are some examples of things we provide to the ATLAS experiment, which is exactly placed something like 100 meters below the building that you have there. Okay, so just 100 meters below this one, you have the ATLAS experiment. Then we have a lot of cabling and so on. We get some signals up to here, and we will see now the control room from which we are monitoring the data. Okay, so please come in.
Don't feed your physicist. Don't feed the physicist.
Okay, so welcome in the ATLAS Visitor Center and the ATLAS Control Room. So just behind these windows, you can see the ATLAS Control Room. And from what I said outside, you see you have different desks corresponding to the different subdetectors. And so all these people are checking 2 important things from their screens. First of all, they check the detector, the subdetector behavior, because it should be able to do some measurements and some recording of data. And this is a normal situation, so we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you can also see a lot of information on the screen. So, for instance, let me start with a very important one, the one that you have on the right side. This is a view of a current event. Actually, this one has been taken at 9:30 this morning. And so you see we have a huge amount of tracks with different colors. You have the transverse views, you have the longitudinal views also down. And you can see different things. When you see different tracks in the upper right corner, you see the tracks of the particles. And down, you can see in yellow, for instance, some energy deposits. So we record this, and we can actually get that really fast, like within a second, we can display this. Here, we just display one of the most interesting that we took this morning. Because right now, we have a kind of test. We are in injectors preparing beams for physics. Okay, we are preparing to get data soon. Then the second screen is a summary of the status of the detector now. So you see that almost everything seems to be green, so all the different detectors are ready. And blue is a kind of equivalent, it's standby. So it's a subtle difference, but not really important for now. And then the next one is coming from the LHC team. So a few kilometers far from here, you have an LHC control room. So please take into account that here we just monitor the experiment. Okay, we look at the collisions. But from another area, you control the collisions of particles, the parameters of the beams, and so on. And they have a huge work as well. And then here they display, they tell us what kind of beams they have and the properties of those. For instance, you can see the energy in top, 450 GeV per beam. Then the number of protons you have in one bunch, in one beam. So IB1, 1.13 or 17 times 10 to the power 10. This is the number of protons you have per bunch, per group. And then the size of the beam, you see these parameters, TDIP2 gaps per millimeter. You have 10.78. This is in micrometers, so you have both dimensions. And then on the plot, you can see three lines. The blue and the red corresponds to the 2 beams, and the black corresponds to the magnetic field that we need. Then below there are details. Right now we are not taking data. Afterwards you have the plan of the day. Every morning we have a meeting at 9:30 upstairs. And then other details, because of course you guess that we need a lot to deal with the timing, the synchronization, all this stuff. And this requires also a lot of people. Okay, then all these people are Atlas physicists. Most of the time, I think that all of us have some kind of engineering background as well, because it's important that you understand the detector to afterwards to be able to do physics with it. And coming from all countries around the world, because you know there are more than 170 institutions working with Atlas, so this is a huge collaboration. Okay, then I would like just to mention one thing, for instance, because you could be interested in what kind of energy we have when we collide particles. And you know there are many stories about we could create black holes or other things. And for instance, just to give you an idea about what we can expect from that, I would like to give you some numbers. And for instance, when you collide the beams, you have an energy which could be equivalent to a train running at this speed, 160 kilometers per hour. And this is at what we could call the macroscopic scale, at our scale. We can be almost at the same scale as the train, the plane, or whatever we can touch and feel. But at the level of the particles, of the level of one proton, this energy is corresponding to a mosquito, so 1 microjoule. And if you want to compare this, you know, when you eat some food and so on, this is much more than this. So this means that once we collide this huge energy for particles, we have less energy than a grain of rice or whatever. So in total, the collision can't really be seen as a huge nuclear explosion or something like that, because the energies are not of the same order, you see. And if you also wonder then what did we do if we accelerated all these particles, we reach almost the speed of light, and finally we just get a mosquito. Well, from the mosquito point of view, we have given to it the energy of a TGV running at this speed. This is the effect of the accelerator. But we don't feel this effect. We feel the mosquito. But the mosquito or the particle could be like a train, and this is colliding into a train. And so, for instance, then if you deal with black holes, and we would rather prefer to talk about micro black holes, you have to think about the possible dimensions you can expect from that. And for instance, some protons have a size, and your phenomena could be of the order of a certain size. But even if you grow by a factor 1,000 or millions or even billions, you don't get even a few centimeters. So we might expect from our point of view some micro black holes, but we are not sure that we can cope with it with a detector, because this would be in the central part and it's really hard. And then there are other things that we can obviously test with our detector. Let me just conclude with a really nice one about physics, because afterwards we have to move. So this is a kind of explanation or a summary of what we can also study with our collisions. This is the evolution of the universe, and it looks complex, but it is not actually. You have time here, and what we do in our experiments is that we have in the collisions an equivalent energies that you can see here. And with our experiments, we are probing a point in time here. So we are recreating somehow the same conditions. And this is what you can hear when you said, okay, CERN creates the Big Bang. No, it doesn't create exactly the Big Bang. It creates almost the same conditions as the one we expected at that time. And so you see we are already 1 picosecond after the Big Bang, and if you have a bit more energy, which is a bit more than 1 TeV, you can maybe recreate the original or the primary objects that we had at the beginning of the universe that we call elementary particles. So far, we are stuck at a point where we think that inside protons and neutrons, we have quarks. So these are these guys, quarks and antiquarks, and also electrons. But we don't know if there is a further stage beyond. And you see that, for instance, it's difficult to believe that we could probe or really get into a Big Bang situation exactly, because this would mean infinite energy. And then this is our most, I don't say that this is exactly the truth that we have experienced in the past, but with all the experimental results, this is our best expectations, I would say. And you see that some primary objects have been created, and then afterwards they have combined, some heavier ones have appeared, and then finally you have protons and neutrons here, then atoms, then clouds of gas, galaxies, and up to our times, okay? So obviously we had also worked with astronomy, nucleosynthesis experts, many other fields actually. But this shows you how we can study the history of the universe, also the present by studying matter. Cosmic rays is another example, and also maybe predict the future. Okay, so let me just let's enter inside. And so these buildings are really old, probably since 58 or 60, something like that. And for instance, this hall in the past has been used for everything. There was an accelerator coming from this side, and then you had the beam, and it was spread around, and you have a lot of small experiments. Now it's not anymore used for this, it's used to store some stuff, and also there is an experiment here, or an accelerator, a chain if you like, called LIR now, and we will have a look just very soon. So here we are almost, this is the start of the accelerator chain, and you would see that we have 5 accelerators in a row just before we reach the LHC. Okay, so let's continue a bit further, and we would start with the CMS satellite control room.
Okay, this is the satellite CMS control center. It's called satellites because this is the secondary one. As Atlas, we have another principal one at P5, which is on the other side of the ring. So we needed one control center which was closer to where the offices are. Here we're taking care mainly of offline jobs, so for example, computing shifts. So some of the alarms which come to CSCS are sent by guys sitting here during the night. So every desk is a different subdetector. So for example, there is a position for tracker, computing, and every kind of subdetector. There is also some stuff for video conference with Fermilab and other remote CMS centers. Okay, so we are in the room that is called the billing room. So this is showing a lot of details and interesting accelerator screens, as well as some photos and pictures. Okay. So for instance, let's start from this side with the accelerator chain. As you have seen this morning some dipoles parts. So we were probably around this point here somehow. And then this is the LHC accelerator, which is the final stage. But before that, you have many accelerators. So you start from LINAC 2, which is the source of the protons. Actually, we are going to see that in a few minutes. And then you inject the protons into a long chain, so you have a booster, then a PS, finally a SPS, and finally the LHC. And all along the chain, you accelerate the protons, and we would see some screens afterwards. You have also on the right side some photos of the different accelerators, and you can see, at least from the pictures, that these ones are the old ones, and when we move to CNGS and LHC, these are more recent, but the principle is the same. And for instance, the experiment we talked about when my colleague was joking about the speed of light, this is this one, CNGS. And I would show you a little bit which other project we have from this accelerator chain. And when you enter, for instance, inside the SPS accelerator, you have a certain speed, and when you leave it, you have 0.9 times the speed of light. Then you enter inside the LHC, and you reach almost the speed of light for the protons. The main period during the year, we accelerate protons, but about 1 month in a year, we are colliding lead ions. So there is a LINAC 3 here, and you inject lead ions. You deal with them in this LIR apparatus that we are going to see on the way to the accelerator, to the LINAC 2. And then finally, you join the same chain. You accelerate as well the lead ions. Finally, you split the beam into 2, and you accelerate them many times. In the last ring, we do something like more than 11,242 turns per second, and we do that for minutes. The full travel from the injection, we start from an hydrogen bottle, bottles of hydrogen gas.
we excitate this gas, and somehow we manage with, again, using a magnetic force to inject the protons inside the first linear accelerator. And so we make them travel all along the way. We have only one beam up to the SPS, and finally we divide it into two tubes, as you have seen also this morning. The full travel from injection to the first collision points take about 20 minutes. But obviously, provided that we have prepared all the technology we need for that. So it means vacuum in the pipes, it means cooling for the magnets, it means the electronics, the sensors, all the stuff to be able to accelerate and guide the particle, as well as controlling them. So as I told you also just before, we have many projects at the same time because we have a long chain. So we can profit from that to extract some protons on the way. And for instance, you have ISOL here, which is an area dedicated mostly, I would say, a little bit to matter and nuclear physics, but low energy stuff and other things. Then you have some other experiment like NTOF, which is studying what we call the time of flight for some particles. So this is an equivalent of the time of living, if you like, more or less. Then here you have one called AD, so this is an anti-decelerator. So at CERN we have also dealt with antimatter. Maybe you have heard that around between 1999 and 2001, we produced the first atoms of anti-hydrogen. And we would see that, for instance, this LIR has been used in the past to do that. Now it has been moved, and we use it only for lead ions. But this is where we have discovered some 10 years ago, the first hydrogen atoms. And you know, an anti-hydrogen, and the anti-hydrogen is not like you take an hydrogen, you shuffle and you have it. It's like you have to produce the antiproton, you have to produce the positron, and you have to force the positron to turn, or anti-turn if you like, around the core. And this needs energy, this needs something, you know. And this, I will show you how we did. And so this is an example of apparatus that we also use for other purpose, studying antimatter and for some other applications. Then another one which is really nice, this is this one, CNGS, CERN Neutrino to Gran Sasso. So we have some protons, we collide into a beam. Somehow, from some physics studies, we get some neutrinos and we send them to Gran Sasso in Italy. And since these particles are really low, they don't interact almost with matter, so they can go through matter and travel a long time before they collide into something. And for instance, Gran Sasso is distanced by about 732 kilometers. So in average, we have calculated that if we send 1 million of neutrinos, maybe a few reach Gran Sasso after this long distance. And that's it. There are other experiments going on, like COMPASS and so on, but we don't have time to look around. But you see that it was worth to use the full chain for a lot of physics projects at the same time. So we start from some linear accelerators, and here we have different tanks. They have different labels. It's not really important, but all the particles go through these tanks, and you can see some of their properties. So I'm not really expert, so I won't tell you which one is what, but all along the way, it is accelerated. We will see these rings just very soon. And then here you can see what is sent to what we call the proton synchrotron booster, so one of the first accelerator. And you see that, for instance, at a certain time, we send some particles to a different area, to a different experiment or project. And you see when there is a kind of number of bunches, so this is one kind of group, and so on. And you see that we are constantly sending some stuff as long as we have protons in the first rings. Then you continue all along the chain, and finally you have another accelerator here, and then finally you have the SPS, so which is just a big one before the last LHC. And you can see also some plots showing you at the same time the injection of particles and the magnetic force. And you can see some other details which I don't really know all these parameters, but you have some sequence and you repeat that. And once, for instance, you send some particles to one area, of course, afterwards you can switch, change, or do some things and send it somewhere else. And you repeat that all along the time, as long as we have filled an experiment, or as long as, we have provided some particles to design the energy to the other experiments. Then finally here we see the same that we have seen before, so I don't have to explain. And I think that was a good overview of the different accelerators. Obviously, there are some control rooms. For instance, the main LHC computing room, in which they are taking care about all these parameters all along the beam. For instance, this is, showing about 15,000 machines, I think, roughly. And in total, we maybe deal with 100,000 in the grid cloud. So this is really like 15% of the total, I think.
How much percent?
15%, I think.
15.
15, yeah.
And where is all the rest?
In the world,
In the world.
Yeah, spread.
What's the Linux for? Like, say, AXP.
So this is our computer center dealing with a lot of stuff, and for instance, which is also responsible of the all the HTTP transfer in one of the region of France called Rhône-Alpes. And we deal with many types of systems. We deal with Windows, with Linux. We have different types of databases. And we try to update this as much as possible as far as we have money. So for instance, every 3 or 6 months, it's not like the experiment that we have to deal with over 10 or 20 years. And there are a lot of people dealing with this, maybe something like, I think in the IT division about 300 persons are dealing with computing. And for instance, the yellow stuff that you can see are dealing with mail exchanges and so on. And of course, for the critical services, we have backup. Then for the rest, I think you are.
Computer center of CERN?
I think so, yeah.